Thank you so much for your presentation. Then we will move to Ms. Ikeda's comments. So please, Ikeda-san.
はい、Professor Edmans, thank you very much for your presentation. It was so inspiring. My name is Yoko Ikeda from Cabinet Secretariat, and thank you for having me today here. Now I'd like to make a quick comment and ask you two questions. Here in Japan, we are promoting the concept of new form of capitalism. It means creating new markets by solving social problems. In other words, it is designed to achieve solutions to social problems along with economic growth. So we totally share an understanding with your idea in the book. Recently in Japan, entrepreneurship is becoming more active. And according to a survey, surprisingly, the number one reason for starting a new job is to solve social issues and social problems. Here, I would like to introduce a Japanese company named Hitobito, which was founded in 2017 in Fukushima Prefecture, where the great earthquake occurred, by Miyai Kobayashi, a woman entrepreneur. Actually, she devised a way to distribute so-called substandard fruit, then developed a femtech, a female technology product, using Asian persimmon peels that are normally disposed of. She supports local farmers and the community in Fukushima, links urban and rural areas, and also solves gender gap problem by commercializing the product. So I'd say that she found new value in Fukushima's dormant resources. That is, she utilized underrepresented market, as you explained. So I'm interested in creating an ecosystem to increase the number of such companies in Japan. So I have two questions for you. First of all, what can we, the government, do to increase the number of such companies as Hitobito? Of course, the role of regulations is important, as mentioned in your book. I completely agree with your idea. Here, I'm curious about other policy implications, suggestions, and specific initiatives by foreign governments that might be in use. Second question is, how can upgraded capitalism affect the existing economic and social systems? I think it may bring about some discontinuous changes in the way companies operate and in traditional economic models. Furthermore, even large corporations can have opportunities for transformation, as you explained. So my question is, what do you envision in the future after pie is growing and pie economics becomes widespread? So that's all for my comment. So thank you for giving me a chance to think today.
Yes, thank you, Ikeda-san. Then, Alex, do you have any response to Ikeda-san's comment?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Ms. Ikeda, for sharing your thoughts and for these two really good questions. So your first question is, well, what can be done to encourage the formation of businesses like Hitobito? And there's a number, and I mentioned this in chapter 10 of the book, but just to give you a few summaries, I think in order to promote purposeful entrepreneurship, small businesses, access to finance is a real problem. because when you have a small business, there's one big issue, which is information asymmetry. How do you know whether that small business is going to be the next Tesla or the next Google, or whether it will end up failing? And obviously, the vast majority of small businesses fail. So this means that the market solution of leaving it to banks and equity investors may well not work, because there might be quite few people willing to provide capital. So what is helpful is tax incentives to lend to small companies. So in the UK, for example, you have what's known as the Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, where if I, as just a person, Alex Edmans, was to invest in a small business where there are certain restrictions on what counts as small, then 50% of what I invest goes back to me immediately as a tax rebate. And also, if this business does very well, I don't end up having to pay capital gains tax on the gains that I get. So you have tax incentive for these small businesses, and there might be other incentives, not just incentives for the investors themselves, but for the companies. Can we give them particular tax breaks, tax subsidies for something like research and development? This is important. But I think we also, as companies, as governments, look beyond taxes. So what the UK government has is lots of resources for small businesses, telling them how to do things such as have a business plan, file accounts, and so forth. So there's central government websites. There's a government organisation called Be the Business, just giving some guidance and some education and training in order to encourage businesses to start. And even before that, I think the education systems may well need to change. What we learn a lot in school is maths and physics and chemistry and so on, but we don't really learn financial literacy. So things such as what is a stock, what is a bond, what is compound interest, how companies make money, this is something which is of interest to everybody. Even if you don't intend to start a business, this is useful for anybody in terms of investing their money. But we have very little investment in financial literacy. We teach maths, and maths involves things like trigonometry, which is not so practically useful. So to teach financial literacy is very helpful in order to encourage businesses to start. Otherwise, small businesses can be intimidated when they're trying to raise funds or to do as much. Now, your second question, Ms. Ikeda, is on how can upgraded capitalism affect the existing economic and social systems. I think it can have a very positive effect on these systems. One of the motivations for writing Growth Pie was the huge polarization we see in the world today. So we see some business people and some people who are anti-business, and the anti-business people say business is evil, business just mistreats workers, it pollutes the environment, and so on. What I've tried to highlight is business is not a zero-sum game. Business, if it is properly run, can be positive sum. It can create value for society by solving problems, just like the Hitobito example. And by solving those problems, then that creates value for shareholders, because it means that if you're getting substandard fruit, that is more affordable than other sources of fruit, and therefore they are able to make some profits from that. And what I'm trying to highlight is that if you run business with a way that is concerned with wider society, not only is it good for the business's profits, but it's also good for the public perception of business, and that public perception is really important, because if that public perception turns negative, then you can have things such as populism, like the UK leaving the European Union and so on. And so it's important to ensure that business is seen positively, not only by business people, but also by people in society.
Okay, so Alex, thank you. And then let's move on to Q&A session. So we have several questions, and given the time constraint, we may not be able to address all the questions. at first, let's try to take question number 2. Okay, the purpose management is become very popular in Japan, but the questioner felt that the purpose in Japan is seen as a social contribution and somehow confused with the ESG management in Japan. So if you say so as you think, and then what is the difference between the purpose management and the ESG management? So could you give us some notion about this point?
Thank you very much for this question. And this is a very important question, so I'm really glad that you asked it. Many people reduce purpose to ESG. And so what is the difference? So when I started my talk, I said purpose is about doing things for intrinsic reasons. You grow the pie, you create value for society because it's intrinsically good, and then ultimately it will lead to profits as a byproduct. But ESG, I think, is the opposite of this. ESG is you don't do things for intrinsically good reasons. You do things to hit ESG targets. That is an instrumental motivation. It's not an intrinsic motivation. So I will hire new people to my board because they are women or they're ethnic minorities. They improve my diversity statistics, even if they don't really provide cognitive diversity or a diversity of thinking. And so one of my most recent papers is called The End of ESG. It's published in an academic journal, but even though it's published in an academic journal, there is not a single equation in this. This is an essay which can be read by practitioners. And what this highlights is how purpose has now been taken over by ESG. You're doing something in order to show it in the ESG metrics. So if I go back to the example of Vodafone and M-Pesa, how does it improve its ESG metrics? It probably didn't. It didn't improve its carbon footprint. Maybe the carbon footprint actually got worse because it takes energy to run M-Pesa. It didn't reduce the gender pay gap. It didn't change the number of women on the board, but it still created a huge amount of value for society. And so how I see ESG management as currently practiced is you do things to improve the ESG statistics, whereas purpose, you're doing it because it creates value for society.
Okay, so also second question is related to the purpose management. So question 3 says that purpose management is widespread in the UK, where the birthplace of the purpose management. Then thinking about saying about the purpose management, what is the indicator? And if you give, could you give us some notion of the reason of the image of the spread of purpose management in the UK?
Yeah, well, it's very kind of you when asking the question to say that it's widespread in the UK and the UK is the birthplace of purpose management. But I'm not actually sure that this is the case. I think Japan has been practicing purpose for decades. What is in the Japanese systems, let's say Keiretsu, this is a lot of long-term thinking. Japan has always been about treating their employees well, investing in them, and giving them lifetime employment. Even if you don't call it purpose, you have been practicing the long-term capitalism which characterizes purpose. So in terms of indicators, I think this is unfortunately very difficult because if you were to replace purpose with any other similar word, how can I measure the extent of ethical business around the world? It's hard to know because there's no clear measure of ethical business or innovative business or well-run business. But I think what you can look at is, well, which are the businesses which generate high long-term returns to shareholders and high long-term profits? And this is something which is absolutely linked to purpose because purpose leads to long-term success. And for that reason, I will also say that the US is very purposeful. Now, that last statement might seem controversial because often say, well, that the US is very focused on short-term profit, but that is not the case, right? Lots of startups in the US have huge amounts of valuation. And so that value does come from the fact that the US investors do look at more than just quarterly earnings.
Okay, so third question is also related to purpose management. And please look at the question 4. So with the spread of purpose management makes society richer, or will it make companies more competitive and profitable? And what will happen both? And what do you envision in a world where the purpose management has spread? And I think that this question is in relation to the question 1. Please see question 1. If a company takes a grow the pie approach, it's related to purpose management. And what's the type of the or categories of the potential unintended consequences of implementing a purpose management or pie growth? How can some of these potential unintended consequences be mitigated or ameliorated? So this is I think the related question. So could you answer to these two questions?
Absolutely, Hideaki. So for the first one, will it make society richer or companies richer? Well, the answer is it should make both. And so this is the idea of growing the pie rather than splitting the pie. If companies are run with the purpose to create value for society, ultimately profits will be higher. And so I see this as something which is win-win. And therefore, then to answer the second question, what are the unintended consequences of a grow the pie approach? I might be biased, but I don't think there are unintended consequences because I think this is something which benefits both business and society. I guess the only unintended consequences is that the benefits of the grow the pie approach are only seen in the long term. Because in the short term, it is costly to grow the pie. It takes money to, say, invest in M-Pesa. It takes money to invest in your employees. And notice, if the alternative is ESG, a purposeful company might not improve its ESG metrics in the short term. I could improve my ESG metrics by firing a lot of men and putting women on the board, even if they're not fully qualified, but it takes much longer to develop talent from within. And so maybe you don't see the immediate improvement in ESG metrics, but in the long term, both the ESG metrics and also the financial metrics will be improved.
Okay, thank you. So last question is a slightly big one, and please look at the question 5. Okay, so will capitalism change as a purpose management expand? Then the questioner is slightly worried that I wonder if the purpose management will not correct disparity or not. So what is the relation between the spread of purpose management and the disparities issues?
Yes. Okay, so will capitalism change? Absolutely. So it should change into a long-term form of capitalism that is serving wider society. But in terms of your second question, I wonder if purpose management will not correct disparity. I'd actually agree with you, but controversially, I don't think it should correct disparity. First, it's not clear to me why disparity is a bad thing. If Hideaki has 10 and I have 5, and then the pie grows, and Hideaki has 20 and I now have 8, well, there's now bigger disparity because it's 20 versus 8 rather than 10 versus 5, but I am much better off. I'd rather have 8 than 5. If we think about the world today where we have access to heating and lighting and food compared to living 50 years ago, I would rather live in the world in 2023 than in the world in 1973, even if I was high in the income distribution. And number two is that we need to also recognize that companies can't do everything by themselves. We need to have governments. And so this is why I really appreciate Mr. Kader's question at the start about the role of government. Is the goal of, if we want to reduce disparity, that is the role of government. That is not the role of companies. Why is it the role of government? Because different people have different views on disparity. There are some people who tend more to be right-wing, who don't mind disparity. There are others who are left-wing, who are concerned with disparity. And so the population elects a government which is to support the type of inequality or equality that people want. And if the government gets it wrong, they will be voted out. So in the UK, we've had a Conservative government for a long time, and they will most likely lose the next election. So I don't think that this is the role of companies. The role of companies is to create value for society. It's governments who should address disparity because they will reflect the preferences of the electorate as a whole.
Okay, thank you. So it would be a last question, but still we have several minutes, so that's related this question. So I think the audience may have some question about the compensation between Japan and other countries. So you may know the compensation level of Japanese big businesses is still low compared to the US and the UK. And considering on a pie growing economy in Japan, so do you recommend to say use the high powered incentive in Japan? If so, are there any say notice or note on introducing this system?
Thank you for that question. And so there's a chapter 5 in the book, which is about compensation. And again, here my views might seem to be somewhat non-standard. Often people think that a purposeful company should pay its employees, pay its executives little. Why? Because if you pay less to your executives, there's more to give to everybody else. But that is based on a pie splitting mentality. Instead, if we recognize that the pie can be grown, actually we do want to pay a lot for top executives. Why? Because if we get great executives, then they can grow the pie and create more value for lots of other people. Just to give you an example, we had a CEO in the UK called Bart Becht, and he was one who created shareholder value for 10 years, and not just shareholder value, he created tens of thousands of jobs, really improved the environmental record of his company, Reckitt Benckiser. But there was 1 year that he was paid £92 million, and this got people very angry. There was a lot of protest about his pay. He resigned, and then on the day he resigned, the market value of Reckitt Benckiser fell by £1.8 billion. So by trying to grab a little bit of a pie by not paying this person what he was worth, you shrank the pie by having a much worse CEO afterwards, and the performance of Reckitt Benckiser significantly plummeted afterwards. So yes, it's expensive to hire a good CEO, but it's even more expensive to hire a bad one, because you will have worse performance.
Okay, so another question, which is the last question from audience, is the audience would like to know Japanese, audience is very interested in the purpose management. You suggested the Toyota or Yamaha case is a typical case in Japan, but so this questioner would like to know other cases of the good example of a purpose management other than Vodafone. So are there any typical case of having a purpose management outside Japan?
Well, within Japan, there are lots of outside Japan, there's lots of examples, and in the book, I have tons of examples, not just Vodafone. Vodafone actually only appears in chapter 8 of the book. Before we get to chapter 8, there's lots of other purposeful examples. But also in terms of Japanese companies, there's many more Japanese companies in addition to Toyota and Yamaha. If you think about Japanese companies which have been successful for a long period of time, let's say Sony or Toshiba or Hitachi, all of these companies, because it's long-term success, they will most likely have been driven by a purpose.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So as Alex said, that the book by Glow was published in 2020, and this was right now translated into Japanese. And the topic of the compensation of the and the relation between the purpose and the ESG, or the role of stock repurchase or buybacks in economic development. So this topic is written in his book, and now it is available in Japanese so that we can learn the topic, which may have a lot of implication to design of the Japanese new capitalism. So that I highly recommend you to take this book and to consider about this thing. Okay, thank you so much, and we really appreciate to be here and give an excellent presentation. So it's a time to close the session. Again, thank you so much for Professor Alex Edmans.
Thank you so much, Hideaki. Thank you to Rieti. It's really great partnering with you. And thank you so much to the audience for giving up their time to hear my thoughts. Take care, everybody.